Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Elliot Gerson from the Aspen Institute. Delighted to welcome all of you here today. Special thanks to Bob and Soledad Hurst for sponsoring this Hurst Lecture Series. And a special welcome also to many people listening in on Aspen Public Radio. Our guest today is Senator John McCain. Senator, as always, we're thrilled and privileged to have you here in Aspen with us. We thank you very much. I thought we'd begin with foreign policy. I think it's fair to say that there's really no American who is more respected across the aisles in foreign policy than Senator John McCain. And the global landscape at the moment is pretty ominous. And I think we almost have to start with Egypt. I'm not sure how many of you might have been out hiking today and not seen the news and developments from Egypt. But the country is in a full-fledged crisis. Shortly after dawn this morning, security forces went in to clear out the pro-Morsi protesters. They used apparently armored vehicles, live weapons, snipers. At least 200 people have killed, perhaps far more than that. The Muslim Brotherhood has said 2,000. Journalists were killed, mothers and children. There's fighting all over the country. 2 Christian churches have been burned. Government buildings have been burned. 6 hours ago, the government of Egypt, the interim president declared a state of emergency, which is to last a month. There's martial law, banks, stock exchange closed. The vice president, Mohammed al-Baradei, resigned in protest. Our Secretary of State, John Kerry, just a couple of hours ago, described the whole situation as deplorable. You were just there last week. Not saying it's your fault.
It was my fault.
Do you think that there can still be reconciliation and negotiation any longer? Is it possible that Egypt could be now the new Syria?
I don't think it will likely be the new Syria, but the chances of a peaceful resolution have been diminished dramatically. And the United States of America, because of a lack of leadership, in my view, have contributed to the terrible tragedy that we see ensuing in the streets of Egypt. But first, could I just say, on behalf of the citizens of Arizona, I want to thank you for the water that you send down. We're very grateful for that. Barry Goldwater used to say that in Arizona we have so little water the trees chase the dogs. So we are very grateful to you for that. Egypt is the heart and soul of the Arab world. 1 out of every 4 people who live in that part of the world live in Egypt. The cultural, historic, everything about Egypt makes it the most important country in the Arab world. Not to mention the relationship with Israel, and not to mention the fact that the Egyptian culture is really of the greatest importance. The Morsi government abused power. The Morsi government suspended the judicial branch. I hold no brief for the Morsi government. But Mr. Morsi and his government were elected by the Egyptian people. And the Morsi government was overthrown in a military coup, and a non-elected government was appointed in its place. We have a law that says that countries that we give aid to, that aid will be canceled if there is a coup or a decree that overthrows the government. So when this happened in Egypt, our government, who was asking the Egyptians to have a constitution-free election, our government refuses to enforce our own laws. So we're supposed to ask other countries to enforce theirs. That's not credible. And there was great praise of General Assisi and that everything, we were going to move forward with the Constitution, et cetera. Well, obviously that hasn't happened. And what has happened is that we are now seeing bloodletting in the streets of Egypt, which will continue for some time. The reason why Lindsey Graham and I went over there is because we know these military guys very well. We have a very close relationship between the United States and the Egyptian military. We know these people, and we made the strongest plea that they would not use force to remove these demonstrators, that they would announce a date for the Constitution, announce a date for elections, and put Egypt on the path that we wanted them to. And they refused to do that. They became angry. The Egyptian government-controlled newspapers, by the way, attacked me and Lindsey ferociously. And the anti-Americanism there is hard for me to exaggerate. So what did our government do? One, they didn't suspend aid, so we didn't abide by our own law. And Lindsey and I said, it's a coup. You got to suspend the aid, but we could motivate them to move on the path that I just described to you. 2 days ago, our Secretary of State, who is a close friend of mine, thanked the military, the Egyptian military, for, quote, restoring democracy. I'm not making that up. He thanked them for restoring democracy. And so I believe that the Egyptian military believed that they had a free hand. And they have obviously exercised that. What may transpire, and I hope not, doesn't transpire here, is not the Syrian experience, but the Algerian experience. There was an uprising in Algeria some years ago. It took them a decade. They killed about 250,000 people while the government solidified its power in Algeria. There are weapons flowing all over the Middle East, from Libya, from a lot of other sources, and the violence level that could transpire here in Egypt is indeed very, very concerning. So what do we need to do? Absolutely cancel the aid, but make it clear to these generals that our tourism, our economic assistance, the IMF, which they need the loans from, they got $14 billion from Gulf countries and the Saudis, and they can probably get another $14 billion. But they aren't going to continue to give them that kind of money, and we have to make them understand there are serious consequences to this kind of behavior. So far, this administration has not done that, and that is a failure of leadership, and it's not only there in Egypt.
Senator, you from the very beginning, I think, said a coup is a coup is a coup, and you were proud to say that. But I think you also were reluctant to cut off aid. So are you saying today that your view has changed and you thought that it actually could damage Israel?
I was against the Congress cutting off the aid, but just flat out voting that way. What Lindsey and I wanted, and we were able to convince 85 of our colleagues to vote for, is not to cut off aid, but that to say we have certain expectations of a constitution, dates for elections, et cetera. And by the way, when we went, I forgot to mention, in Egypt we said to the general this: let some of these Muslim Brotherhood people out of jail. They're being kept incommunicado in prison. All the Muslim Brotherhood leadership are. Let some of them out, negotiate, and have the Muslim Brotherhood renounce, and we met with the Muslim Brotherhood, said they had to renounce violence and condemn violence and have a national dialogue. That's the only way out of this dilemma. Well, both sides, not just the generals, but also the Muslim Brotherhood refused to do that.
Did you ask General Sisi if you could see President Morsi?
Yes, we asked to see Morsi, and they refused. Interestingly, he said that the Egyptian people would be very angry if we saw Morsi. That one I didn't quite understand. But we did see members of the Muslim Brotherhood, and that it was pretty obvious to us, to Lindsey and me. In fact, we wrote a piece in the Washington Post that unless they did something quick, that a lot of bad things were going to happen. But I think part of our lack of influence had to do with a failure to condemn the coup, which was obviously a coup.
So it seems that you think we're essentially our policy that makes us complicit in what's happening now.
The Washington Post has an editorial tomorrow that is as harsh, more harsh than the language that I am using today, that alleges that our government is complicit in the bloodletting that's taking place in the streets of Egypt, of Cairo, and the rest of Egypt.
Senator,
it's a very sad, tragic story that's unfolding.
Senator, in retrospect, do you think we would have been, or not as if we controlled it, but things would have been better if an increasingly ineffective and unpopular president were defeated democratically as opposed to being removed by the military?
Yes, and they did have parliamentary elections scheduled for this November, and that wasn't that long to wait, in my opinion. And El-Baradei, by the way, who just resigned, the vice president, in protest of this, is also a Nobel Peace Prize winner. He is a man of enormous stature, not only in the Middle East, but in the world.
Let's just move a little east across the Sinai into Israel. Yesterday, Israel started releasing more than 24 prisoners. These are people who are viewed as heroes and political martyrs in Palestine and viewed as murderers and terrorists in Israel. Your friend Senator Kerry has embarked on a very ambitious effort to try to get Israel and Palestine to negotiate on a very short time frame. Trust is very low, expectations are low, the neighborhood is in flames. How do you think this effort is going to come out?
Well, I don't have high expectations either, but I do applaud Secretary Kerry for making the effort. I do applaud Secretary Kerry for bringing the parties together. There is a level of mistrust which has now been increased on the part of the Palestinians because the Israelis announced 1,200 new homes and settlements. There is still a divided Palestinian situation between Hamas and the Palestinian. There's a whole lot of reasons why it can't succeed, but I applaud Secretary Kerry's effort. I know he will have the support of all members of Congress in this effort, but I really wouldn't get our hopes up too high, and I don't think John is raising those hopes very much. But I would also point out that the Israeli-Palestinian issue is of longstanding and of vital importance. But right now, 100,000 people have already been killed in Syria. It is turning into and we're going to talk more about it, it's turning into a regional conflict. It is affecting surrounding countries. It is a crisis of monumental proportions, and this country is standing by and watching.
Well, let's talk about Syria then. And you have been very outspoken in your criticism of President Obama from the outset. You were an early advocate for a no-fly zone, for targeted airstrikes, never boots on the ground, but you felt those other things could make a difference. A lot of time has passed, a lot of lives have been lost, a lot of terrorists have moved into Syria. We don't know who the rebels are. Is it too late for us to do what you've been advocating all along?
Every day that goes by, the situation becomes more alarming because of the fact that it is becoming a regional conflict. It is no longer, I think we need to put it a little bit in the context of what happened in the Middle East, and it's going to happen in Russia, and it's going to happen in China, and it's going to happen all over the world, and that is the Arab Spring. You might recall it was when a young man who was abused by the police and humiliated, and his fruit that he was selling taken forward, poured gasoline and set himself on fire. And that has spread everywhere. And it's had ups and downs and fits and starts and tragedies and triumphs, but the world is changing. And it's changing for a whole lot of reasons, and one of the reasons is because of these devices. And it's never going to be the same again. And when we see the Arab Spring affecting these countries, then we don't think that a lot of the outcomes are what we want, but it's never going to be the same again. Just like we could not have stayed with Mubarak. He was going to go when they took place in Egypt. So we have a situation where Bashar Assad, there was some demonstrations, I think it was in Homs, some young people, and they yanked him, put him in jail, tortured him, beat him up, and killed a couple of them, and that started this uprising in Syria. And we watched while it went from an uprising where Bashar Assad was about to be defeated until the Iranians came in with the Revolutionary Guard, the Russian arms shipments flown in every day, Hezbollah, 5,000 of them, well-trained, devout, hardcore fighters come in, and the tide has obviously been reversed, while 100,000 people have been massacred. 100,000 people. I wish all of you today could have had the same experience I had to go to a refugee camp either in Turkey or Jordan. I've been to both. And see these 50, 100,000, 75,000 refugees. See these children. Meet the group of young women who have been gang raped. Meet the young men who have been badly tortured and see the scars on them. Meet the young woman that I met in the camp in Jordan who was a school teacher, and she said, Senator McCain, see these children around here? See all these children? I said, yeah. She said, they're going to take revenge on the people who refuse to help them. And that's you Americans. You know what happens in the Palestinian refugee camps? You saw the extremism that it bred. We're going to be paying a price for this for a long, long time. And I'm not asking for boots on the ground. I am only asking, and we have been asking, and there's more and more members of Congress anyway who are coming in our direction. You can establish a no-fly zone with a few airstrikes, despite what you hear the Pentagon say. They're only using 40 airplanes, and they're using 4 airfields. Right? The Israelis 4 times have taken out arms that were destined for Hezbollah with strikes from outside of Syria. We can do the same thing. And it will not be difficult at all, despite what the Pentagon and the administration says. Talk to General Keane, the architect of the surge, and I can tell you that. And so we, right now, the momentum is on Bashar Assad's side. More alarming than that is jihadists are flowing in from all over the Middle East and Europe. The French ambassador to the United States told me they're tracking 180 French citizens that have gone to Syria as jihadists. And so they're flowing in from all over, and it's gone from this thing where there was an uprising where these young kids were killed into a regional conflict. The king of Jordan says he can't last a year. Lebanon is verging on the chaos of a conflict like they saw in the 1970s. The whole region is about to become engulfed in this conflict, and there is no American leadership. And that's what appalls me and makes me, I can't tell you, I no longer am angry as much as I am just sad. I talked to General Idris, the head of the military in Syria just yesterday. He called me. He said, we're doing a little better. We're getting some weapons in. He said, but this al-Nusra, this Islamic extremist group, they're getting a lot of equipment and a lot of arms as well. And some people are very worried about al-Nusra and General Idris, the Free Syrian Army people, joining together. Well, General Idris' response to you would be, well, America has abandoned us. We've been abandoned. Who do you expect us to join with when we are being slaughtered in the fashion that they are? The President of the United States stated, if Bashar Assad uses chemical weapons, it will be a red line that will be crossed and it will be a game changer. Bashar Assad used chemical weapons and we have done nothing. And don't think the Iranians draw lessons from that. Don't think as the centrifuges continue to spin, don't think that other nations in the region aren't taking the same lessons from that, whether it be Iraq, which by the way has unraveled badly, and countries like that and Afghanistan, where we still haven't concluded an agreement on a residual force.
Well, maybe we'll come back to Afghanistan and Iraq in a minute. So you fundamentally challenge General Dempsey, the head of the Joint Chiefs, who said that it was going to be billions and billions and highly problematic to engage in Syria as you recommend.
And General Dempsey had no answer to what the Israelis were able to do. 4 strikes took out 4 targets, which were sophisticated weapons, which the Syrians were sending into Hezbollah, which obviously we know would threaten Israel. 4 times, with just airplanes sending them missiles and destroying them. All we have to do is crater the 4 runways of the 4 that they're using, take out some of the aircraft on the ground, their maintenance, their fuel storage, and have a no-fly zone, which is protected by the Patriot missile, which are already there, and set up this no-fly zone. My friends, some of you may remember that when genocide was taking place in Bosnia, and President Clinton, a bit belatedly, but decided that we had to prevent genocide in Bosnia, and we went in. We told the Bosnian Air Force not to fly. One of them flew, we shot it down. It was the end. These Syrian pilots are not going to fly into certain death, I can assure you of that.
You mentioned the regional implications of all of this, and you mentioned Iraq. And I think I'm right that you spent July 4th in Afghanistan with our troops there. There are probably fighters now in Syria who were released from the Abu Ghraib prison when al-Qaeda-related groups went in. I mean, it seems like things are unraveling there. And what are the lessons about how we left Iraq, how we're leaving Afghanistan, and what we leave behind?
All along, we had planned on keeping a residual force in Iraq of some 20,000 to provide them with the things that they couldn't do. And it's too long a story, but they negotiated down and down and down to 3,500, and then it wasn't worth it. We had insisted that their parliament approve sovereign immunity for our troops. They didn't want to do that, and it wasn't necessary. And the President of the United States announced when he ran for president he was going to get us out of Iraq. There were many of us who said we've got to have this residual force because they need it, and they didn't do it, and now Iraq is obviously becoming a Sunni-Shia conflict of enormous proportions. There were more people killed in the month of June than there has been since 2007. The violence is everywhere. And interestingly, the al-Qaeda, which has reconstituted itself, is flowing back and forth between Syria and Iraq, a very interesting aspect of this conflict. So all I can say about Iraq is that it's unraveling, and the Sunni-Shia conflict continues to worsen, and I don't know any real good outcome there, at least in the short term. Maliki has not reached out to the Sunni in the way that a lot of us had hoped that he would, and the Sunni obviously are reacting in a fashion that they did before the, what did we call it, the Sunni awakening, when we brought them into the government.
I want to move to
Sons of Iraq.
I want to move to some domestic issues before we open it up for some additional questions, and maybe a good segue from your discussions of a very strong American foreign policy would be to the conversations that, when indeed we've had several here on this stage this summer, prominent Republican speakers decrying what they see as the rise of isolationist attitudes in the Republican Party. Right here, Karl Rove, Governor Christie, all speaking really quite passionately of concern. And what are your views about the implications of some of the things being said, some of the comments, the resolutions and amendments, Senator Paul, Senator Cruz, about America's role in the world and what that means for the Republican Party?
Sure. Could I just finish up on the Middle East a second with you? I don't want to send American troops anywhere. Americans are war-weary after Iraq and Afghanistan. I don't want us to get into another conflict. But there is such a thing as American leadership, and that is in a broad variety of ways. And to abrogate those responsibilities, never to announce anything except withdrawals, that then people take the appropriate lessons and they make accommodations in the region for an absence of American leadership. That's my problem. I've been accused of being a, quote, hawk and interventionist and all of that. Yes, I supported Bosnia and I supported Kosovo. I did not support sending the Marines to Lebanon when Ronald Reagan did that, and there's other times I have not supported it. But I think that what you referred to is a very interesting thing that's happening within the Republican Party but is not new. You can go all the way back to the beginning of the last century with the Republican Party, where there has been this struggle between the isolationists and the internationalists. After World War I, we didn't go into the League of Nations because the isolationists won. Prior to World War II, there was Lindbergh and Republican senators, particularly from the West, and others that kept us out of war. There was a strong anti-war movement there. And after World War II, there was the Taft wing of our party and the Eisenhower wing. So it's a constant battle, ideological battle that goes on in the Republican Party, and to some degree in the Democrat
Party too.
In the Democrat Party as well. There was certainly a crisis in the Democrat Party in the 60s and 70s.
And we see that now in the NSA reaction to some of that. It's both sides.
Exactly. But as a Republican, I have to say that we do have this rising element within the Republican Party that Ronald Reagan wouldn't recognize, even though they call themselves Reagan Republicans. And this battle has to be fought on a respectful level. I do not disrespect Mr. Paul and Mr. Cruz and Lee and all them, but we have to respond. We can't let them have the playing field. And that's why from time to time we get in very spirited debates through the media and on the floor of the United States Senate. I think the economy has something to do with this rise of isolationism. I just came from doing a series of town hall meetings. We're in recess. As you know, Congress never misses a recess. And people don't, they don't want us involved. They don't want us engaged. And I understand that when still nearly half the houses in Arizona are underwater.
Water from Colorado.
So we have to make the case of the consequences of Fortress America and Withdraw to America. If at a town hall meeting, if I said, how many here people think that foreign aid is 50% of the budget? Some hands would go up. How many think that it's 30% of the budget? Most of the hands go up. It's less than 1% of our budget. Most Americans believe that it's just squandering these hundreds of billions of dollars. And there are a lot of waste in our foreign aid. I will freely admit that. But it is also, I think, a very important part of our ability to affect events and nations throughout the world.
Back to this movement within the Republican Party, and it's undoubtedly becoming very strong. The polls are very early, but Rand Paul is leading polls right now for 2016 nationally. I saw a poll today. He's leading in Iowa. He's leading in New Hampshire. 2016, who would get John McCain's vote, Rand Paul or Hillary Clinton?
I was asked that once before.
Did you answer it?
Look, I can't go down the list of people I would vote for or against, but I am a loyal Republican. As long as it's a legitimate process of nominations and votes, I am a loyal Republican and will support the nominee of my party. And if I'm not going to support the nominee of my party, I will leave the party. But I don't have no vision of that whatsoever. Again, I think that this debate is an important one. I do believe, I know what I was going to respond to. There is a core out there of very dedicated loyalists that supported Rand Paul's father, Ron Paul, and it is 10, 12, 15% of the Republican Party. I would argue from my experience in the Republican Party all these years that it doesn't get any bigger than that. I think that there's going to be, I think we have a lot of very highly qualified candidates, and I look forward to observing the contest. By the way, I do ask your sympathy for the families of Arizona, because Barry Goldwater from Arizona ran for President of the United States, Morris Udall from Arizona ran for president of the United States. Bruce Babbitt from Arizona ran for president of the United States. I from Arizona ran for president of the United States. Arizona may be the only state in America where mothers don't tell their children that someday they can grow up and be president.
Thinking about the town meetings you've just been having, I just wager a guess that you might have been asked a question or two about immigration. You were obviously a prominent key negotiator in the so-called Gang of Eight in the Senate, in the bill that passed in June. You are from a border state. You're intimately knowledgeable about these issues. Things aren't quite going the way that you thought they might have, and things are going very differently in the House. You've been active with the Business Roundtable, Chamber of Commerce. Where is this going to lead?
I still hope that it will lead to legislation emerging from the House that we can go to conference between the House and Senate and come out with a legislation. There's so many aspects of this issue, but I would just like to point out that the argument that we're not going to have a secure border does not hold water. We're spending $18 billion a year right now on border security. This bill calls for $46 billion additional, not out of taxpayers' money, but fees paid by those people who are on the path to citizenship. All of us should agree, all of us, no matter where we are, that having 11 million people living in the shadows is de facto amnesty and is not satisfactory, whether you are for or against what we did. Well, if that's the case, then why can't we sit down and work out a proposal? Our proposal isn't engraved in concrete. We are ready to negotiate with our Republican friends and Democrat friends in the House, but we're asking them to pass legislation that we can go to conference and come out with. And there's so many aspects of this issue, but this bill was tough, but it also has the largest coalition behind it that I have ever seen in any piece of legislation. The evangelical community, the Catholic Church, the AFL-CIO, the Chamber of Commerce, the growers, and the farmers union, that union, the small business coalition. Literally every coalition organization in America is behind this legislation. And so I've been, and my other friends have been going around doing town hall meetings and saying, would you please ask we have 4 Republican representatives in Arizona. By the way, they inquire daily as to my health, but to at least support some legislation that we can work on together and the president can sign. And my friends, there's only one criteria that we cannot violate, those of us who did this bill in the United States Senate, and that is it has to have a pathway to citizenship. It has to have that because you cannot keep a group of people in this country and never allow them to become citizens. Look at the European experience that they've had with their immigrants. So that's the only criteria that we hold in this legislation. And and by the way, if I have my way, if we pass it, it'll be called the Edward M. Kennedy bill.
Senator, let's talk about the debt ceiling and sequester on deficit. You've been leading the efforts for compromise on the debt ceiling and trying to avert a government shutdown. While you obviously want to reduce the deficit, you've also wanted to roll back the sequester. And that's a vote that I think I'm right to say you said was the worst vote you've cast in years. Can you tell us why you feel that way and where you think this is going to go?
Because I think we address the debt and the deficit in the most unsatisfactory and indeed a bit cowardly fashion, just mandate across-the-board cuts. That means that every program of the same value, it means that it cuts into things that we don't want cut, and it doesn't cut enough the things that we do want reduced. And It is harming our military in ways that I could take a long, long time describing to you how our military leadership are telling the Congress that they are not going to be able to carry out their responsibilities if we continue with this. But let me just give you a small example. I know that many of you know we lost 19 brave firefighters in Yarnell, Arizona not too long ago. And by the way, the vice president, the wonderful guy, came and gave a great speech of consolation to the families and the people there. But next year, there will be a $140 million reduction in our funding for firefighting. Now, the one thing that I think we can be confident of, there will be more fires. But we're going to impair our ability to fight fires, for God's sake. I mean, that's just a small example. Now, if we gave the Department of the Interior said, look, you got to take $140 million, I think they could probably find $140 million that, might be painful. But here, this across the board is devastating. And so I'm hoping that we can reverse it. We've been talking with the president, as you know, a lot. And we've been talking Democrats and Republicans to the point of agonizing boredom. But I have found in my experience with these things is you talk and you talk and you talk and you talk, and everybody has their own facts, Everybody's entitled to their opinions, but they're also entitled to their facts. And so, but many times I've found that then if you establish that conversation and that dialogue long enough, you can reach some agreement, and I'm hoping that we can. Now, could I just mention to you the idea of shutting down the government unless we repeal Obamacare? Now, the last time I counted, there's 45 members of the United States Senate that are Republican. It would require 67 members of the United States Senate, which I devoutly hope, that would be enough to repeal Obamacare. That would mean you repeal it with 60 votes and you override a presidential veto. That's not going to happen. So for us to tell the American people that we're going to shut down the government if we don't repeal Obamacare is sheer fantasy. In 1995, we had a showdown with President Clinton over shutting down the government. Remember Newt Gingrich, et cetera. It didn't work. The American people blamed the Congress. Whether they should have or shouldn't have is an academic discussion. They blamed the Congress. And I'll tell you the first thing you're going to hear is, guess what? If we shut down the government, the families of the men and women who are serving and fighting in Afghanistan will not receive paychecks. Now that's kind of hard to argue against. It's kind of hard to argue against. So I think, in all due respect to my handful of Senate colleagues that want to do this, it's a fool's errand. And I would be glad to vote against many provisions of Obamacare that I'd like to see repealed, that I think is disastrous for the country. But to say you're going to shut down the government if we don't repeal it, I just think it's almost insulting to our intelligence. Not quite.
Just one last comment, and then I'm going to turn it over to the audience. Senator McCain, you really are a paragon of what service to country means. I think everyone feels that way. And earlier this summer here at the Aspen Institute, we had a national summit to create a movement for a national civilian service program, and you spoke to that program by video. You couldn't be there. And this is something that you have spoken about for many, many years. That is that military service, civilian service, two sides of a coin, that young people would love to have an opportunity to serve their country. And I wonder if you could just share with us why you were supportive of this effort and what your vision is of national service.
Well, nothing is more rewarding than to serve a cause greater than your self-interest, and I have found the most rewarding parts of my life is having been engaged in. I believe we have a generation of young Americans who want to serve, and we should find ways for them to serve. You and I were talking earlier. The Ivy League has way oversubscribed graduates who want to teach for America. I'm sure many of you know that program is going into the inner city and the Indian reservations and other places to teach for America. AmeriCorps is oversubscribed. I just think that our job is to provide them with the avenues where they can serve, and the military obviously is part of that. I'd like to mention about, if I could, on immigration and service that I think epitomizes a lot of things, particularly when we're talking about immigration. Every year for the last 13 years, Joe Lieberman and Lindsey Graham and I have gone to either Baghdad or Kabul for the 4th of July. We take part in ceremonies and awards and spend as much time as we can with the young men and women who are serving. In 2007, General Petraeus asked us to preside at or be part of a re-enlistment ceremony that was taking place in the, Saddam Hussein's old palace. There's a couple of thousand people there. And 200 and some men and women were re-enlisting to stay and fight rather than, rather than go home. And also as part of that service, there was over 80 individuals who were green card holders who were going to receive their citizenship. Many of you may know that if you're a green card holder and you enlist in and serve in the military, you have an accelerated path to citizenship. So we walked in, and as we sat down, Petraeus and I and Lindsey Graham and Joe, and I looked in the front row of these people who were going to receive their citizenship, and there was 4 empty seats with boots on them. And I asked General Petraeus, I said, who? What is that? And he said, oh, those 4 were killed in the last 48 hours. Well, excuse me. And he said, we're going to make them citizens posthumously. So I think that we ought to appreciate the fact of how incredibly important and valuable it is, something we take for granted all too often, and that is citizenship in this country. And the people, and the young people particularly that I talk to, who are now living, a part of those 11 million living in the shadows, they want to do these things too. So I hope we can not only do what we can to bring them out of the shadows, but recognize they have and will continue to make enormous contributions to America, as every generation of immigrants has throughout our history.
Thank you, Senator. Okay, we're going to questions. Please wait for the microphone and your name and a short question, please.
My name's Larry Gelman, and as a constituent of yours in Tucson, Arizona, I want to welcome you and thank you for your service to our state and our country.
Thank you, Larry. I had a spirited town hall meeting there yesterday.
I know you did.
Sorry you missed it.
I heard about it. In any event, to go back to what you were talking about at first and your seeming frustration with the lack of leadership that you say our country is showing in places like Egypt and Syria. In Aspen this summer, we have heard from numerous diplomats, military officials, experts from the entire region who seem to almost unanimously say it's not always about the United States, and this isn't about you. What's going on in Egypt is an Egyptian problem. We couldn't have saved Mubarak. We didn't throw out Morsi, and whatever they're going to do, they're going to do. The Syrian issue, it's hard to find who the good guys are that we're supposed to be supporting. So I would ask you, in view of some of these thoughts that have been expressed over the summer, how do you respond to that in view of what you've just said?
Well, I guess it all depends on your view of America's role in the world. If you think we should sit back and watch 100,000 people be massacred, watch hundreds of people who were massacred yesterday, that's your option. You're a citizen. I believe that it was not an accident that the 20th century was called the American century. We shed American blood and treasure all over the world, usually in defense of somebody else's freedom. And if you think that a tremendous upheaval in the Middle East is not going to touch the United States of America, then you again and I have a very different view of the connectivity between what happens in the Middle East and what happens in the United States of America. And I believe that there's always been this discussion. There, as I mentioned, there's people that didn't want us to go in most conflicts that we've been in, and that's their right to do that. I believe that America is the indispensable nation. And I don't believe that if America is missing, that who does take their place, for example, Iran, because if Bashar Assad wins, I guarantee you Iran will have enormous influence throughout the Middle East, not just Muslim, but Persian, not just Arab, but Persian. So we just have a difference of opinion as to what America's role in the world. And if you think we can't do anything about it, sit back and watch. That's what we've been doing for the last 2 years in Syria, as it's gone from basically what was demonstrations and uprising to a regional conflict. I don't think that when you look back at the last 2 years in Syria, that things have gone very, very well. And I don't think they're going very well in Egypt. And the fact is that the United States, as the greatest nation in the world, does have influence. And if you don't think the United States has influence, again, I respect your view. I think that America has led and should continue to lead, as we do in almost every aspect of the world. And if we don't stand up and speak up for people who are struggling for freedom and their basic human rights, then that's not what my version of what America is all about. But I will challenge anybody who says that we can't make a difference. I will challenge that, and I will show you how the United States can turn the tide in Syria by negating Bashar Assad's air advantage. And I am, just like we did in Libya when we took on Gaddafi when he was at the gates of Benghazi and took out his air power and took out his capabilities. So again, thanks for the comment, and obviously you share a different view than I do. But I also have a history of remembering that the United States sat back and watched what Nazi Germany did prior to World War II. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we'll go over here now. I can't really see with the lights, but I think we're going to go back and forth where the microphone is over here.
Good afternoon. My name is John Lindeman. Senator, I want to thank you for your service and sacrifice. I'm a retired Navy captain myself. And I have a question. Listening to your rationale, what do you think might be the repercussions if the United States were to get involved in Syria? What do you believe the Russian response would be?
Well, yeah, that's right. We didn't even talk about Vlad. Thumb in the eye, Vlad. The Russians would not do anything more than what they're doing now, which is daily arms flights into Damascus, overflying Iraq, by the way. The Russians are overflying Iraq with plane load after plane load of military equipment and capabilities into Damascus. I think the Russians would probably not do anything more than what they are doing. I am confident. There's an outfit called the Institute for the Study of War, which is headed up by a guy named Fred Kagan, and General Keane, who was the architect of the surge, which General Dempsey said wouldn't work, the architect of the surge that turned the tide in Iraq, it was part of. There are 4 airfields that the Syrians are using. There are approximately 40 to 50 aircraft that they are using with standoff weaponry outside of their missile defense capability. We could take out those airfields, take out those airplanes, and keep them from being the decisive factor on the battlefield that they are. Right now, Bashar Assad is moving men and equipment around Syria by air because he can't do it on the ground. That's another advantage that he has that would be negated. Now, again, these are credible people, and I think what gives credence to what they're saying, as I mentioned before, 4 times the Israelis have stood off and taken out armed shipments that were on the ground inside Damascus and taken them out because they were about to be shipped to Hezbollah. Now, if the Israelis can do that with impunity, one wonders why the greatest and strongest nation in the world can't do the same thing. And I'd be glad to send you the study, Captain, from the Institute for the Study of War. It makes perfect sense.
Thank you. Okay, I guess I can't say we just go to the audience. This gentleman in the third row. You can pass the microphone down, please. Thank you.
Richard Gordon, Senator, Aspen, Colorado. Thank you for coming here. To me, it's not a question of do we have the might to do it, but it's more a question of what will the aftermath be? Right now we have, on one side you say Hezbollah is fighting, and I think they're fighting for the Shiite crazies.
Yeah, which they weren't doing 2 years ago.
Right, and they're in there now. And who are they fighting against? A bunch of Sunni jihadists who are affiliated with Al-Qaeda.
Actually, they're fighting against Bashar Assad, but go ahead.
Right. So you have Hezbollah on one side and the Sunni jihadists who've come in on the other side, and they're killing each other. How is it in the interest of our country to spend our treasure and risk our lives to get in between that?
Because, thank you. Because if your thesis, there's only one flaw with it. That is that the conflict will be confined to Syria. It's not. The King of Jordan has announced that he doesn't think he can last a year. Lebanon is on the verge of a conflict that will divide Lebanon in the most serious fashion. The Saudis are now, it's a Saudi versus Iran war. It's Sunni versus Shia. It can engulf the entire Middle East, as I said before. Maybe you were nodding off. But the fact is, I said this before. The danger of the conflict spreading throughout the region, which it is, and major players being involved, does not mean we just sit and watch a conflict in Syria, because it is spreading, and it is spreading in the most violent and terrible fashion. And again, 100,000 people massacred? This guy goes in, and we have human rights organizations all over the world testifying that they kill and they torture and they rape under instructions from Bashar Assad. Doesn't that move you at all? Doesn't that somehow strike our heartstrings that if we could establish a no-fly zone and get these people the arms that they need, and when the arms are flowing in from Iran, the arms are flowing in from Russia, it's an unfair fight. Shouldn't we at least help them fight on a more level playing field? So I guess that, and I apologize for being rude, but let me just say that I think your premise is that this conflict can be contained and it really doesn't affect American national security interest. I believe that it's going to spread, and it's going to spread dramatically, and I'm afraid the more and longer it goes on. Look, 2 years ago, there wasn't a jihadist in Syria, okay? A year ago, they were not very much there. We could have made a huge difference then. Instead, we sat by and watched it. And so I guess my answer to you is it's going to get a lot worse, and it is not in America's national security interest, at least until we become energy independent, to see the Middle East engulfed in conflict. I thank you.
Thank you. Over here.
Senator McCain, first of all, I'm John Jaffe from Pennsylvania. Thank you for coming, and I don't think we can ever thank you enough for your service. Amazing, heroic service. I think I would like to shift the conversation back, if we could, to this country and some domestic issues. First and foremost among which is this administration, which has hatched a series of scandals probably unprecedented in history. Benghazi, the IRS, the phone snooping, the AP reporters, and on and on. And so I would like to ask you what you think of the media coverage of all these fairly amazing scandals. And secondly, do you think there will ever be enough public opinion that will rise against this administration to generate the strength in Congress to begin impeachment? Thank you.
I've seen no grounds to impeach the President of the United States. By the way, after I lost to the President of the United States, I slept like a baby. Sleep 2 hours, wake up and cry. Sleep 2 hours, wake up and cry. I believe that there's media bias, but I also believe that there are so many sources of information out there today available, particularly to younger generation, that there is no real, quote, mainstream media anymore. When I can dial in literally as many apps as I want to have, I can bypass. Some of us are old enough to remember that it was an appointment that we watch Walter Cronkite every evening in the CBS Evening News. He was voted consistently the most respected person in America. Does anybody here really ever make a point to watch the evening news? If you do, you probably pick it up someplace rather than having it interrupt your dinner. So I believe that amongst the, quote, mainstream media, I can see example after example. Well, my own campaign, but that isn't, frankly, doesn't concern me nearly as much as it used to, because of the many sources of information that people have today. And of course, we have Fox News, always fair and balanced. Anyway,
Let's go over to the far end, if we can get a microphone. And then we have time for one more question after that.
could we do two?
Why don't we take two questions, and then the senator can answer both of them.
Senator McCain, Clive Smith. In the 20th century, it seemed like America was the country of practical, scientifically based, capitalist, rational thinking. China was run by a bunch of people who were selected on their ideological purity, and the Russians were just evil. And it seems like today we have the Russians haven't really changed. The Chinese are driven by rational reason and thinking, and we have become the people who are led by ideological purity. It seems to me that that is a bigger threat to our long-term national security than the Middle East or any of these other things, this extremely partisan Congress that we have. If you could just sell, serving a cause greater than themselves to the U.S. Congress, I think we'd be in good shape.
I didn't really hear a question
Before we
there.
go to the next one, the other day I came home, I was go through Sky. There's the approval rating of Congress is 12%. We are down, that's a fact, we are down to paid staffers and blood relatives. You can't, I was going through Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport the other day. A guy runs up to me and says, "Hey," he said, "anybody ever tell you look a lot like Senator John McCain?" I said, "Yeah," and he said, "Doesn't it sometimes make you mad as hell?" So I have no doubt, sir, about the American people's approval of our performance in Congress, and we need to work together. We need to address these issues. Our children and our grandchildren are going to pay a very heavy price if we don't get the debt under control. But I would still argue that all these devices that we use, which help us communicate so well, didn't originate in China. Now, maybe a lot of them are made in China, but they didn't were not developed in China or invented. I know that one part of our immigration bill is to let any student who is in postgraduate in science, technology, engineering, or mathematics, if they want to stay in this country when they graduate, they can under this immigration bill. And there is and by the way, the majority of students in those subjects are not from the United States of America in postgraduate schools in the United States of America. And I guarantee you, most of them are going to want to stay here and not go back to China, because this is where the innovation is. This is where the imagination is. America still leads in that. I'm not apologizing for anything that Congress does, But I will guarantee you for a long time to come, every one of these innovations which helps us lead better lives and communicate with one another and inform and educate will come from the United States of America. And I hope you're not judging us just by the gridlock in Congress.
Thank you. Could the gentleman actually bring the microphone? I can't see the people very well. The gentleman in the back in yellow.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Warren Klug. I'm in the hotel business here in Aspen. Senator, I want to thank you for coming and for this program. And I want to thank you for your efforts on immigration. To any resort community like Aspen, it's a huge, huge issue. And appreciate your work on the Gang of Eight. But further on immigration, we hear, of course, the arguments about the 11 million undocumented folks. And a compassionate America says, let's not desert these people. Let's provide opportunity for them. But there's also a business aspect. These people are working somewhere because their employers need them. They're not just sitting around. And I'm wondering how somehow the business concern of immigration reform seems to have been left out of the conversation. And frankly, our Republican friends in the House seem to be ignoring the traditional business orientation that says, not only do we care about these people and want to be humane, but what about their employers? What about the business issue? Can you help us on that a little bit?
Yes, and I'm sorry I didn't mention it earlier. The Congressional Budget Office issued an estimate the other day, and another $480 billion over 10 years will be added to the economy. The GDP will be added, 2.5% of the GDP will be added. This is if we pass the legislation that in Arizona, in 1 year, it'll create an additional 6,000 jobs. The CBO estimates of the effect of immigration reform is for not to mention Social Security Trust Fund will almost be made well because we will have all these workers paying Social Security taxes. So we haven't made that argument well enough or strong enough. But here's the problem, too. I'd like to remind you. If you look at any poll that I can show you, Republican, Democrat, Independent, is over 70% of the American people support immigration, comprehensive immigration reform if the people who are here illegally pay back taxes, learn English, pay a fee, and get in line behind everyone else who is waited legally. Then you get over 70% of the American people say, fine, because we're good people. But the 30% or 25 or 20 or whatever it is, they're active. They're out there every day. How many times do you hear the talk shows and who calls in? Who is it that's running the ads? And I've been telling my friends, particularly in the high-tech community, talk is cheap. We've got to have a coordinated effort. We've got to have our evangelicals out there. One of the things I've been talking about, can we have a Sunday? Can we have a Sunday, say maybe in September, where every evangelical church and every Catholic church in America, the subject of the sermon that day is immigration reform? Can't we talk about the fact that today, somewhere in southern Arizona, they're going to find some bodies of some people died in the desert? Don't you know what these coyotes do to people? They bring them across, especially to young women. Don't you know there are drop houses in Phoenix today that are jammed with people that they're holding and for ransom back in Mexico? Don't we know that drugs are flowing across in the most sophisticated fashion? And someday we've got to, this is not the time for it, we better have a national conversation about drugs, my friends. We better have one because as long as there's a demand, there's going to be a supply. I saw a submarine down in Colombia. I said, how much the submarine cost to the people that showed me the submarine they had captured? He said, $5 million. I said, wow. He said, they make $15 million on one run of this submarine. So, but I'm getting off the subject. But we are a Judeo-Christian principled nation. And the thought of having people remain in this status, exploited in every way by predators and evil people, is not something that we should sustain as a society. And again, throughout our history, and I'm insulting your intelligence by reminding you, there's always been a wave of immigrants and they grabbed the bottom rung. We can't get workers to pick lettuce in Arizona, in Yuma, unless they are immigrants. Nobody in this room would do it, I promise you. There are that they will do as they grab the bottom rung and then move up on the next rung and the next rung and the next rung, as every generation has that's come to this country, only it used to be easy. And the lady that held her lamp, holds her lamp beside the golden door is still there. But we can't have a situation where that percentage of our population is deprived of everything that we said America stands for about inalienable rights. So I thank you for your question.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry, our time is past. Senator John McCain.